Hi everyone, have you ever wondered how is the low light performance between the Sony Xperia Pro-I and the Sony ZV-E10 in auto mode? Well, you're probably thinking it's a bit unfair to compare a cropped 1.0 type sensor to the APS-C sensor on the ZV-E10. But hey, being humans, we're curious, so let's find out how they compare. Alright, so why even compare these two cameras when to most people it's obvious that the ZV-E10 will probably have better low light performance? Well, let me give you some reasons for those who might be interested in this comparison. One, you're just curious and you want to see how the Sony Xperia Pro-I compares to an APS-C type camera like the ZV-E10. Second, you've been a stout supporter of just using digital cameras for content creation, but are thinking about getting into short type videos such as TikTok and YouTube Shorts. And some people may prefer the convenience and lightweight of the Sony Xperia Pro-I over the quality of video and audio coming from the Sony ZV-E10. Third, you're a beginner content creator and you're weighing the pros and cons of using something like this camera, or to most of us, a smartphone that is simpler to use, lighter, and easier to maintain compared to something like a digital camera as the ZV-E10, which is bulkier and can have a lot more complicated menu systems and longer setup. I was thinking about going over the pros and cons of using each one, but that would make the video a bit longer. So I'm just going to put it in the description. You can go ahead and check it out there. So both of these cameras will be in auto mode, autofocus, and auto white balance. Both cameras will be filmed in 24mm focal length. For the Sony Xperia Pro-I, the main camera is a 24mm focal length, full frame equivalent according to Sony. Now, for the Sony ZV-E10, I'm going to be using a Sigma 16mm f1.4 lens. The full frame equivalency is around 24mm. But remember, the Sony Xperia Pro-I only has two apertures, an f2.0 and f4.0. So I will set the aperture on this to f2.0 for low light use. I'm using the Rode video mic on each of these cameras so you can hear the audio performance between the two. If you see any videos of myself wearing this shirt, that means it's straight out of the camera and it hasn't been edited. And I'll leave it up to you to decide if this is better for your needs or the Sony ZV-E10 for vlogging in low light conditions. Alright, let's get this comparison started. Okay, we'll start with the Sony ZV-E10. Right now, this is auto mode. If you watch my previous video on the low light performance in auto mode for the Sony Xperia Pro-I, I'm going to be using the similar light setup. I have 4 different lights that I'm using for my in-room vlogs. I'll go ahead and include the diagram so you can see what the lights look like. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off each light and you can see the low light performance for each one. Right now, like I mentioned before, this is in auto mode and the aperture is at f1.4, but the ISO is at 100. Usually when I do these in manual mode, I set the aperture between 3.0 to 4.0 and the ISO is around 800. So this will be interesting to see when I go ahead and edit it. Also, all the lights are on right now. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off this light here to my left. Alright, I turned off the light to my left and right now the aperture is still at f1.4. ISO is at 125. It's also keeping the shutter at a consistent 1/50. Now I'm going to shut off the overhead light. All right, overhead light is off. ISO is now at 200, but the aperture is still f1.4. The shutter speed is still at 1/50. Now what I'm going to do next is shut off these incandescent lights. They're more for decoration than really giving off any noticeable light. But they're good to have because many content creators like having these types of lights in the background. Background lights are off and the ISO bumped up to 250, still at f1.4, and the shutter speed is 1/50. I'm going to turn off all the lights so you can see what's going to happen next with this camera. Alright, so all the lights are off. Now I did mention in that Sony Xperia Pro-I video where I did the low light comparison that I do have a window off here to my right where light is coming in, and you can see when I use the Sony ZV-E10 you can actually see myself appear, unlike the Sony Xperia Pro-I. Well, you could kind of see me, but not as clearly as this. I'm looking at the monitor here and I can almost see everything. However, the ISO is at 4000. The aperture is still the same, f1.4, but the shutter speed dropped down to 1/30. Alright, there you go. That is the low light performance of the Sony ZV-E10 in auto mode in a studio or small room type setup using 3 to 4 lights. I'm going to switch over to the Sony Xperia Pro-I now, and I hope it doesn't shut down on me during recording. The temperature in my room is about 30 degrees Celsius, so probably going to have to make that video quick. Alright, see you on the Sony Xperia Pro-I. Is the Sony Xperia Pro-I with all the lights on and in auto mode. I always forget to mention this, but the auto exposure for the ZV-E10 and the Sony Xperia Pro-I is set to 0. Let me turn off this light here to my left. The light is off here to my left, and I always mention this, I can't see the settings for this camera. I'm doing it blind. But when I hit the record button and came over here, the ISO is at 800, the shutter speed is still at 1/50. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn off this overhead light. Overhead light is off, so the shutter speed is still at 1/50, but the ISO bumped up to 1600. What I'm going to do now is shut off the background lights. Alright, background lights are off, ISO bumped up to 2000, but the shutter speed is still 1/50. So I guess these lights do help a little bit to brighten my room. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off all the lights, and we're just going to get light from my window to the right so you can see how it performs without any lights on. Alright, all lights off. The ISO bumped up to 3200 and the shutter speed dropped down to 1/30, which is interesting because during the same scenario with the Sony ZV-E10, the ISO was bumped up to 4000, but the shutter speed still stayed the same as this camera at 1/30. I always forget to turn off the auto ISO for the Sony Xperia Pro-I when I do these videos. I have it set for 3200. During editing, I realized my mistake, and that's why I look different. I have to redo the footage with the auto ISO turned off. So right now all lights are off. There is light coming from my window. It is sunny, and before I came over here I checked the display and the ISO is at 6400 and the shutter speed is at 1/30. On the Sony ZV-E10 the ISO was around 4000, so the Sony Xperia Pro-I is bumping it up a little bit more than the ZV-10. I'm assuming it's probably because of the differences in the sensor sizes. Hey, wait a second. When I watched your previous video, the Sony Xperia Pro-I low light performance in auto mode, I noticed that during the all lights off test with this camera, it looked a bit darker. Well, the reason you can see me now is because at that time it was raining and outside was very dark, so there wasn't much light coming in. Now it's sunny outside and that's why there's more light coming into my room, and you can see myself a lot better than what you saw on that other video. There you have it, the low light performance in auto mode for the Sony Xperia Pro-I in a studio room type environment for vlogging. Well, no overheating warnings during this video, but of course this is pretty short. I think I only spent about 3 minutes filming everything for the Sony Xperia Pro-I. What I'm going to do is I'll take screenshots of both the ZV-E10 and the Xperia Pro-I, and I'll do like a comparison after this so you can get a closer look at the quality of each camera in low light. That's it everyone for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this information useful and it may help you decide if you want to go with something as light, easy to use and compact as a Sony Xperia Pro-I, or you just like the video and audio quality more from the Sony ZV-E10 and it's worth the hassle of having a bigger setup and, well, a little bit more complicated menu. Please hit that like button and leave any comments. I always try to answer everybody's questions or any comments that they have. As always, stay safe, keep learning. Aloha.